Welcome to the first ever episode of Good Thought, Why Not? A storytelling podcast where real people tell real stories about how following through on one thought led them to where they are now. I'm your host, Eliza Zobel, and I am so excited to finally be here with you. As you'll learn throughout this episode, this podcast has been in the works for a long time, and so I'm just happy we're finally here. I want to lay a little bit of groundwork for how this podcast and episodes will typically work. Typically, we're going to have a co-host who will be sitting here sharing their story. Ideally, it will be one of you coming on to tell us your good thought and where it led you to. But today, unfortunately, it is just me. If you're watching on YouTube, you might be able to see that my dog is sitting next to me, but I apologize. I don't think we're going to get a lot of commentary from him today. But with that said, I am just so excited to be here with you today and to share this story. So we're just going to dive right into this. It's 2020, and before you start freaking out, just turning off this thing because you don't want to hear anything about 2020, I promise there's a reason and there's an explanation for it. But for me, it's 2020. I'm living in Denver, Colorado. COVID is running rampant, and the world is just kind of negative. I'm going to be real with you. Everybody's depressed. Everybody's isolated. Everybody's having a moment. When I was in Denver, there were the Denver riots. There was rioting at CU Boulder. And I believe there was even like a car flipped. There was a shooting near the grocery store near my house. And there was a lot of chaos that was going on. And I just remembered feeling really heavy, really negative, really isolated. And I was just kind of sick of the bad. It was taking over. And, you know, I'd realized people had always said, you know, you're most like the three people you spend the most time with are who you become kind of deal. And well, it's COVID. I'm isolated. There wasn't much I could do. And so I feel like I was honestly becoming like social media. I was becoming negative. I was becoming cynical. I was becoming depressed. And I didn't like that. That's not who I am. That's not the type of person I want to be or aspire to be or anything like that. And so I just remember sitting there, seeing all of these things, feeling helpless, and feeling like there was nothing I could really do. And, you know, that scared me. I didn't like that. I wanted to change it so that that wouldn't become who I was. And so I had heard that all of these people were starting up podcasts, and I was like, okay, well, maybe there's a podcast I can listen to that'll be uplifting. And so I journeyed in to the depths of Spotify to try and find the best good podcast. And, you know, I found some really, really good podcasts, but I also didn't feel like they related to me. I didn't feel like I could understand in the same way. They weren't giving the effect that I'd wanted, because they would be sitting there sharing like just good news from around the world, which is really good. We do need more of that. We need to hear the good news because we already know there's enough bad. But I personally had a really hard time relating to this thing where it's talking about a doctor from Malaysia who's cured malaria or something like that. And I didn't feel like I could relate to that because I'm not a doctor. I've never been to Malaysia. I've never had malaria, luckily. I'm very blessed. And I just didn't feel like that was something actionable that I could relate to or that I could do. It kind of frustrated me because a lot of these podcasts were just talk about good things around the world, but they didn't feel personable to me. They didn't feel relatable, like I said. And so I kind of kept looking. I kept hoping I could find something that I was like, yes, this motivates me. This is going to make me a better person. This is going to make me stronger and happier and that. But I also didn't want like a cheesy, fluffy, cakey thing, you know? I didn't want to just be like, wow, you're so incredible, you know? I wanted it to be real. I just could not find a podcast. There was nothing out there. And maybe I was just naive and didn't know where to look, but I genuinely could not find a podcast that was what I was wanting. And then I had the thought, well, maybe you should just make one. Maybe you could be that person who's sharing the relatable stories of just everyday people, not doctors in Malaysia. They're incredible, don't get me wrong, but that's not the average person. And so I thought maybe that could be me. And so then I was like, wait, that's kind of cool. That would be kind of a fun idea. And then I sat there and reasoned myself out of it a little bit. It was just like, well, who am I to interview people? I don't know people. I don't know these things. It's COVID. I can't even interview people. But, you know, I pushed through. And I started thinking, I was like, okay, well, how could I position myself to be different from these podcasts? How could I do these things? And because I didn't, like I said, I didn't want to just be your mushy gushy fluffy podcast, but I didn't want to be your unrelatable Dr. Do-Good podcast either. And so I kept brainstorming, and it was like some random Thursday night at like 2 a.m. I'm sitting here and I had this realization that everybody has good thoughts. We just suck at acting on them. And the way this kind of came about was because I was sitting there and I was thinking, like, I was feeling kind of guilty because I'd been thinking, oh, I should reach out to this person. And I just never did it because I was worried of how they would react. Because I didn't feel like I knew them well enough, but I was worried about them and I wanted to check in with them and make sure that they were just at least okay, right? But I never actually sent that text because I was worried as how it might be perceived from me and that they might think I was weird. I then sat there and I was like, wait, I've received texts like that. I've received a text just saying like, hey, how are you doing? Or hey, good luck on that job interview. Or hey, how did that day go? You know, I've received those texts and I've never once been mad about it. I've never been annoyed that somebody cared enough to reach out. And then I started realizing that applies in a lot of broader contexts. I have never been annoyed when someone just came and sat by me at a social function. Okay, well, that's a little different because sometimes, you know, you don't want people by you. But for the most part, when someone has come and sat next to me at a social function, I've been like, oh, somebody actually wants to like talk to me? That's crazy. And so the point of this is everybody has these thoughts to reach out, to go sit by that person, to ask that girl on the date. But we talk ourselves out of it. And I learned recently that that's actually called experiential avoidance, which is the idea of having a thought to do an action, but then kind of spiraling your way out of it because you're not sure how things are going to go. And then you sit there and you say, well, if I do this, then this is going to happen. It's going to just go bad and they're going to think I'm awkward and it's going to seem weird and it's going to ruin our relationship. It's experiential avoidance, like I said, is that idea of having that thought and then reasoning it away so that you don't ever actually do any sort of action. Well, I realized everybody does that. Everybody has that good thought. But a lot of the times we talk ourselves out of it. So then I thought, well, what if we just started asking ourselves why not? When you have that text or that idea to send someone a text and you're like, hey, I should reach out to them. And then you sit there and you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. Ask yourself, why not? Why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you reach out? Why shouldn't you text them? Because who knows, maybe that person who you're going to text and say good luck on your job interview had actually completely forgotten that they had a job interview, and your text would be the thing that reminded them. Who knows what the outcome may be? It's a good thought, and the possibilities are endless as to how things could play out. So why deny yourself a good thing? Why deny yourself a deeper relationship with that friend just because you're scared that they might think you're a little weird? And so that Thursday night at 2 a.m., I had that realization that this podcast needed to be named Good Thought, Why Not? We need to ask ourselves, well, why not? Why can't I just do this? Because it's literally scientifically proven through experiential avoidance that if you work through it, and if you actually do the action, you're going to have your relationships go stronger. You're going to be happier. You're going to be less lonely. you're going to be more fulfilled. And isn't that what everybody wants? And so that was the idea behind Good Thought, Why Not? And then I did exactly what I ask people not to do. I had this thought, I had this genius thing to go for it, and I crumpled. I experienced my own experiential avoidance, and I spiraled. I started saying, well, who am I to run a podcast? I don't know anything about podcasting. I don't own a mic. I don't own a camera. I don't know how to talk to people and interview people. I don't know how to do any of these things. And I reasoned my way out of it. But that thought stuck in my head for 5 years. It is March 2025, and I'm finally sitting down to create this podcast and to share these stories. So I apologize that it's taking me this long, and I recognize the irony in this, but I hope you follow my lead and that you're willing to take that first step and to take that action, because even if it's 5 years late, I'm actually so excited to finally be here. And I really, really hope that this can also motivate you guys to take those actions, to follow those thoughts, and to ask yourself, why not, when doubt comes in. So, like I said, this is the first ever episode of Good Thought, Why Not? And I am just so excited to see where this goes, because like I said, I don't know where it could go, but I know the possibilities are endless. I also want to invite you, if you have a story, or if you're like, wait, actually, like, that's how my wife and I met, or this is how this happened for me, or I followed through on this thought and this is where it brought me, I encourage you to share your story. I'll include a link on this podcast and everywhere else. It's on our website. It's on all of our social media platforms, where you can go and submit your name and your stories and hopefully be invited to come join the podcast and to share your story. Because as much as I love to sit here and just share my own stories, I know that there are stories out there that can help motivate others to follow through on their good thoughts. So the next time you want to reach out to a friend, remember, it's a good thought, so why not? Thank you so much for tuning in today and for listening. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. We're literally everywhere, and I really hope to be hearing your guys' stories soon. Thanks. Bye.